All right. Well, welcome back. I know I enjoyed my little meal there with no chicken cacciatore, and you seem to enjoy yours.
It was chicken, but it wasn't cacciatore.
Yeah, you know. Next time I'll just bring up the whole stove and everything else with me.
Yeah.
So, but in the meantime, we're still rolling on building blocks, taking a look at C# versus JavaScript and those two environments. That's still Jeremy Foster over there. I'm still Christopher Harrison over here. And Jeremy, do you want to lead the way? And well, actually, you know what, Jeremy? Here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to change my mind right here on the fly, and I'm just going to completely put you on the spot. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. I got a question for you.
Okay.
Where and how do you store data in a modern app?
Well, that's a very good question.
Thank you. Thank you. Thought of it all by myself.
Yeah.
Or read it off the slide, one or the other.
Yeah, I guess it can't be too ad lib if there was a slide made for it, right?
Right.
All right, so the question is where and how do we store data in a modern app?
Yep.
There are a lot of different environments that we might be working with here. We might be working on a website. We might be working in a client app. It might be kind of a legacy app or a more modern app. It might be on a phone or a tablet. You know, they could be all over the place. But the modern concepts of where we put our data have evolved just a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. And so we need to have a discussion around what different types of data are there. And so what are the considerations for data storage? And then what are our options to implement those?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump us back into this CodeShow app. And I'm going to show you on CodeShow one of the samples, one of the demos that I simply called storage. And in the storage demo, I have a number of different sections, okay? And these sections are categorized, organized by the type of application data that we're talking about.
Okay, and we're talking about a Windows 8 app here.
This here is a Windows 8
Right.
app, but the concept is not just for Windows 8 apps. You'll definitely find that this concept transcends Windows 8 and certainly has its place on the phone.
Yep.
So a modern app on a mobile device on the phone, but also, you know, finds its place on the web too. You know, on the web we've got local storage now, so we've got some of these concepts bleeding into all the other platforms and environments as well.
Okay.
A lot of these options are brought to us by the introduction or the popularization of the cloud.
Right.
And the cloud exists for pretty much all of our platforms and kind of is for the web. So, let's just go ahead and take a look at these. The first one is application state. Now, application state is that stuff about the stuff that the user was doing in your application that needs to be memorized, because with modern apps, because we're being considerate of the platform, of the device, the battery life, the processor, the memory, all of that, whenever the user backs out or switches apps, we're actually suspending that application by various techniques. And when we do that, we lose all of our stuff, and it might actually get lost entirely if that app has to be terminated because of memory pressure. So we have to store this application state, and really we want to keep up on this. As the user enters information, we want to modify our application state so that at any point, if that application is pulled out of memory, we're ready to save our place and restore that the next time we come back in.
So that way I'm not having to start my level over of Plants vs. Zombies.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, and actually that's probably, I shouldn't have said yeah to that.
Okay.
Because the memorizing which level I'm on wouldn't necessarily be application state, as in like where was I in the process of using the app.
Okay.
Like the form fields that I'm filling out are the best example of this.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
So with application state, think about it this way. If I close out of my application intentionally, I'm not going to need to keep that state, because I am, as a user, determining time to be done with this application. I expect the next time I come back in should be a fresh start. It's also not going to take effect whenever the app crashes, because I don't have time to refresh my state when the app crashes. So this is really happening in this modern scenario when the life cycle of your app determines that it has to come out of memory for pressure, for performance reasons, and then it's going to come back in when the user restores it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in Windows 8, now I am talking specifically about the Windows 8 platform, you have a state variable that you can drop things in, and that session state is going to be backed up. It's going to be saved into the local store, and then it's going to be restored. And if you use one of the project templates when you start, it's kind of all done for you. It's going to be restored automatically when you come back in. Okay. So anything that I put in this field here is going to be memorized if, and I'm not going to go through the work of simulating this right now, but if I simulate an application termination and then come back in, that's going to get restored. It, however, is not going to get restored if I close out of this application and then come back in.
Okay.
So that's application state. It's also known as session state, and we definitely have session state on the web, right?
Yep.
Same type of thing.
Okay.
Now we've got user settings. These are things about the user that we want to remember, because if a person likes the color blue, they've chosen that somewhere to be their favorite color, chances are that's their favorite color no matter what application they're in or what device they're using, right?
Right.
So these are things about the user that we want to store. Now you can store things locally, or without any more effort, this is again in Windows 8 specifically, without any more effort, I can save things in a roaming environment. So you notice that I had this value in here, test roaming, and that restored in here, even though I had never used this demo or this app on this machine before, because it was saved in my profile.
Yep, absolutely true story. He installed it last night as we were doing our tech check and getting everything set up. That he actually did do that. There was no
smoke and mirrors
setup. Yep, nothing like that.
Okay, let's move on to the next type, application data. So application data, the best analogy or the best example that I have is, let's say you're making a simple app for doing the ubiquitous task list, checkbox, to-do list app that everybody has created. If you're creating a modern mobile app that saves tasks, and whether they're checked or not, and how much time remaining on them or whatever, you need to save that data somewhere. You're going to save it in the application data, but the user doesn't expect that to land as some sort of a user data file in their documents. They just expect the app to handle that.
Right.
This has been getting bigger and bigger the last few years as more and more apps are putting their data into the app data folder. These app data folders are getting nice and big, and that's still available in modern apps. That's still a concept. It's still something that we want to design for. And we actually have, in Windows 8, we have 3 different ways to do that. We can save local temporary files, which those could get deleted at any time. We also have local files. Those are always going to stay on this device. And then we have roaming files. Those ones are going to get copied up to the cloud automatically, behind the scenes in my profile, and come back down to any other device.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, there's a 100K limit on those roaming files. So this is not for app data. This is not for putting in user data like your pictures library, a bunch of videos. If your app is capable of handling those types of things, this is not the place for all of that.
Okay.
This is just the place for little roaming maybe text-based files, or ones that will certainly fit under those limits, because keep in mind, this is going up and down from the cloud all the time in between various devices. If, by the way, you do need to keep application data, you want to store it on the cloud, the best option there is to integrate with the user's OneDrive, and then you can save it in their OneDrive. It's available to them anywhere they're at.
Right, yeah. And generally speaking, whenever possible, just saving to the cloud is really the best way to go. So that way, regardless of where they are, they have access to that, assuming that they have an internet connection.
Yeah, right. And then another type is user data. And with user data, this is where the user actually does expect to kind of own that data. This is if you make an app that, say, is a support app for the Office suite and it works on Microsoft Word documents. You don't want to just work on Microsoft Word documents inside of your app. You want to save those in the user's documents, actually let them elect exactly where they go, and then let the user have the option of opening this document either in your application or in Word. So either place. So images, great example. An image you might want to open with an editing application. You also might want to open it with some sort of a library or sharing application. So lots of different places that that the data belongs. And so we're only going to touch on some of the different ways that we can do data, that we can implement data. And in fact, we're going to be talking some about database. So do you want to kind of position database and where that fits?
Sure, absolutely. So basically, I think the answer to the question then is there's a lot of places, and it depends. ends as far as data goes. So in all the different places that you listed, just like you said towards the very end, you did leave off the ubiquitous database.
Yeah.
And the database, to a certain extent, is an old style way of thinking that, hey, you know what, I'm going to have a locally installed app, and I'm going to set up, a local instance of SQL in one way, shape, or form, maybe some little just add-on that I can go ahead and throw my data into. And that definitely is all well and good, but a lot of times it isn't always going to be appropriate. But if I'm creating my own server-side application, if I'm going to be creating my own MVC app, that's absolutely typically. That's fantastic English. Absolutely typically. So once in a while, all the time. I'm going to want to store my data inside of a backend database. And that starts to bring in a lot of different questions of exactly how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish this? That am I going to go off and create the database first and then start using ADO.NET and connecting up to it manually? Am I going to go off and get something like Hibernate? Go ahead and use that. Or maybe, and this is actually what I want to talk about, are we going to use instead Entity Framework and Code First? Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, first of all, Entity Framework is an object relational mapping implementation. When we're looking at code as developers, we want to keep thinking in code terms. That I don't want to have to worry about what the name of a stored procedure is. I don't want to have to worry about what views it is I'm supposed to be using. I don't want to have to worry necessarily about going off and trying to join tables all together. And I really don't want to have to worry about loading that data up into, say, like a data set, modifying the data inside of there, and then saving that back into the database. Again, that really just gets me out of what it is that I'm currently doing, and it requires a different form of thinking. So I'd really try to avoid that. And that's where some form of an object relational mapper comes into play. That what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a series of objects. This represents the data that I want to work with. I'm going to have my database over here, and then I'm going to have something in the middle here, some form of a go-between that I'm going to talk to from my code to say, hey, this is the data that I want. It's going to be responsible for going off to the database, bringing it back to me, and then giving me back the objects. So not giving me back the raw data, but actually converting those and giving me back objects. And then I can manipulate those just like I would normal objects. And then when I'm done making my manipulations, I could go ahead and hit save, send them back into whatever that go-between is, and then have that automatically send that all back to the database. Now, with an object relational mapper, that helps make my life a lot easier because now, again, I can focus in on the objects. The question is, how do we create that middle layer? And more importantly, how do we create the backend database? And as it turns out, there's a lot of different ways that we could accomplish this. One way is by going off and creating the database in advance and then using, say, Visual Studio to automatically generate all the classes for us. We could also use the designer in Visual Studio. So I could actually go in, create a model, and then allow it to use that model to create the necessary classes and to create the backend database. But as part of the whole intro here, the big thing that I was pointing to is, hey, look, I'm a developer. And I think in code. And as much as I do love designers in certain cases, especially when we're talking about UI, I actually find it a lot easier if I can work with code directly. That I find it much easier for me to go in and make little changes, go in and tweak things. It's an easier way for me to think. And this is where Code First Entity Framework comes into play. That the couple of big advantages that Code First is going to give me, number one, is that it, again, is code first. So I get to write my code, and it will generate the database for me, although I do get control over how that's going to happen. But also number two is that it does help simplify the entity framework. That as much as I love the entity framework, and I do, there's a lot of it that I don't necessarily use on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of power there that I don't necessarily find myself reaching for. So if I don't need it, why task me with implementing it? And once again, this is where code first comes into play, is that it's going to give us sort of that 20%, if you will, the old 80-20 rule, that inside of a product, you use 20% of the features 80% of the time. Well, let's focus in on that 20%. Let's make that very easy. And if you do still need the power, we can still give you that, but let's focus in on the big things that you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis and making that as easy as possible. So let me go in and fire up Visual Studio here. There we go. And there we go. Perfect. So here's what I'm going to do. Is I'm actually just going to right click and I'm going to say add and I'm going to say new project here. And I'm going to create a console app, and this is going to be my code first demos here. So I'm actually just doing this straight from scratch. Now, one of the little things to note is you are going to notice I'm just using a console app here, and I'm okay with that because my goal here is to talk code first entity framework. That what it is I'm going to be showing here will work anywhere. So this will work in MVC, this will work in Windows 8 apps, this will work wherever it is that you're allowed to use code first. So what I'm going to do is add in code first by adding in the entity framework NuGet package. So just a real quick right click, manage NuGet packages, and then we'll just go ahead and hit install there. And let's go ahead and close that out. And now I've got the entity framework built in, or added in. Now let me do this. Let me right click here, and I'm going to say add, and I'm going to say class, and I'm going to give this a name of location. And here we go. Let's go ahead and say public. And then let's go ahead and say public int32 location ID, and a get and a set. And let's go ahead and say public string city. And then we'll go ahead and say get and a set, and we'll say public and string. And I am going to make this US-centric. Forgive me for that. But I'm doing that on purpose just because it's going to make it easier for me to go in and create one little additional demo here. So I'm just doing that real quickly. So in any event, you're going to notice that I've got a very basic little class here that's got a location ID, city, state, and that's it. Now, what I would normally do with this demo is I would use this as a way to create reviews for different running trails. That anybody who follows me on Twitter, sure enough, has been bombarded with the occasional Daily Mile post. And so let's say that I wanted to sit down and create a nice, simple little place where people could go into to find different reviews on places to go run. So when you're in a new town, hey, go here. So I might, of course, store that inside of a database, and they're going to have locations. So there's my little location with the ID and the city and the state. But each location, of course, is going to have a collection of trails. So let me go back in and add in a list here. I'm going to say public list, and this is going to be trail. One of my favorite little features in Visual Studio. I can just type out the name of the class that I want and then just let it generate for me. Right there, what I used is a controlled dot, and that will bring up the little smart tag, and then you'll notice generate new class. Hit enter, and just like that, we'll create my little trail over there. Back to that in just a couple of moments. In any event, let's go ahead and say list trail trails with a get and a set. Cool. And now, let me go ahead and sneak into here, and let's say public trail, and let's say public int32 trail ID with a get and a set, and a public string name, and a get and a set. Cool. So we just kind of added all of that in. And then let's create the reverse link. Let's go ahead and say public location. There we go. Location. Again, with a get.
So you're referring to the actual object there, not, some string or ID or anything like that. You're actually referring to a location.
Exactly, yeah, that I'm actually pointing right back to that object. And so as a result, what I just created here is, if I was just going to sketch up the little basic UML here, is I just created my little setup. I do love zoom it. And oops, got to take that typing down real quick here. Here is my location. Here is my trail. And over here on my location, I've got the location ID, the city, the state, Over here, I've got the trail ID.
Name.
There we go. And then the name. And I went in and created that little one-to-many relationship. So we'll do one and our little star over there. There we go. So that's what I went in and created. I was thinking for just a second about trying to figure out the ASCII key for like an infinity symbol, but I couldn't come up with what that would be off the top of my head.
Alt 0172. Joke.
Okay. And you had me. I was going to go with it. I was going to go with it. Absolutely. 0172.
Nope.
Okay. Actually, I'm curious. Alt 0172. There you go. Whatever that is.
It's close. That looks kind of like an infinity symbol if you stretch.
Sure. Yeah.
If you squint.
Exactly. But in any event, what I want you to notice out of all of that is that I went in and created that very basic little class setup, that I did not do anything in regards to Entity Framework here. I just created normal classes. But here's what's cool. This is now almost all the way built for Entity Framework. That if we come back over here to my code, let's start talking about the different moving parts that I have. First of all, location ID. You know, if you were going to create a primary key on an object, what would you call it?
I would probably call it my object name ID.
Okay, seems pretty safe. And Jeremy, would you believe that basically everybody is just like that?
Yeah, probably most people.
Yeah. And sure enough, you're like that, I'm like that, and the Entity Framework is built for that. So what it's going to be looking for the primary key is either ID or class name ID. So since I called this location ID, that's automatically going to be flagged as a primary key. And on a related note, 9 times out of 10, if you're going to be creating a primary key, what do you want that to be inside of SQL?
Probably an auto number.
Yeah, an auto number. And sure enough, the exact same thing. That will automatically become an identity column, an auto number column inside of SQL. And it's also smart enough to pick up relationships as well. So you're going to notice right down here that I've got my little trails. So it's automatically going to look for trail. And then coming back over here, you're going to notice that it's got the point back to location. So it will create the cross-reference there for me. And then you'll notice the exact same thing here, that I've got my trail ID and I've got my name. Now, the big thing that I want to highlight about all of this is that I used convention. That you'll notice that I kept my names the same, the whole 9 yards. If you want to go against convention, which I really don't recommend, that I remember hanging out here once before with John Galloway, and the way that he put it with MVC, which I think is just perfect, is it works this way out of the box as long as you follow a couple of rules. Follow those couple of rules and let it just work. Just make your life easier. So you could go in and tweak this. You could go in and modify this. So that way in scenarios where maybe you do need a little bit more control, you can do that. But if you can get it to work with just this, do it with just this. Make your life easier.
And I've worked on brownfield applications before where the database already exists. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the option to name things whatever I want. I'm going to have to create these mappings to make it work with this
Absolutely.
database.
Yep, absolutely. And you can do that even though it's code first, you can still use an existing database. You'll have to make sure that you describe to the code first environment how the database looks, but you can use
it's like code first,
database.
second.
Code first, second.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Code second, first, second. In any event, it's something there. Yes. So back over to here, the last big thing that I want to highlight is right down here is my location. Now, one of the things that the Entity Framework is going to do for us is a little thing known as deferred loading or lazy loading, where when I go in and I query for an object, it's only going to look for the primitive types that are off of there. So it's just going to look for things like integers and strings and data that it doesn't have to do a join for. Well, if I have a trail and I want to know its location, it's going to create 2 separate tables here. So I would then need to join to get the data back. So as a result, what the Entity Framework will do is it will only load the basic data and only grab the location once I actually touch it. Now, that's both a good thing and a bad thing. that the good part about it is going to hold off on loading it. The bad part is it's going to hold off on loading it, that's potentially going to require another round trip back to the database. I will mention that when you go in and create your queries, you can go in and modify that behavior if you so desire. So if you want to tell it, hey, when you go grab this, also grab that, you can absolutely do that. Now, in order to support lazy loading, there's one little change that I need to make to the code to make that work, and that is to mark this as virtual. And that's just going to let the entity framework inject its own little bit of code into there to go ahead and load that up. And the exact same thing is going to hold true here. So they need to be marked as virtual. And let me go ahead and virtual allows for lazy loading. There we go. And that way you'll have that. By the way, while I'm doing this in the background, let me just mention real quickly that I am going to upload all my code to a OneDrive. I'll do that a little bit later and make that available. So that way you'll be able to go grab all the source code that I'm putting together here. Okay. Now the other part that I want to mention about my little trail here is you're going to notice that I've got my location. Now, this works. It does. And I can absolutely leave it this way.
We should just trust you?
Well, yes.
Okay.
That's what we're going to go with.
That's a deal.
Yes. Excellent. Now, the catch here, though, is it doesn't work in all environments. See, here's the problem. I'm an MVC guy. I'm a web guy. And as a result, I deal in a lot of stateless environments. You make the request, we build something up, we send out a response, we disconnect, we forget everything. And this poses a little bit of a problem because any data that we've loaded is now gone. So imagine a scenario where I give you an edit form. I want you to be able to edit a trail. So we load up the trail, we build up the form, we send it down. Well, we didn't send down a location. And then you fill out the form, you send it back to me without a location. I then go to save the update back to the database without a location. And that's going to fail out. So while it is technically possible to get away without this, I always recommend that you throw in another little property here. Actually, I'm just trying to organize my code here. I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to go ahead and say public int32 location ID. I always recommend that you throw in some property to point to the primary key on the other side. So you'll notice I've just got that integer there. And by the way, Julie Lerman, who wrote the books on Entity Framework, Code First, the whole 9 yards, fire up your favorite bookstore or roam down to your favorite bookstore. That's the author you want to be on the lookout for, Julie Lerman. She recommends the exact same thing. Whatever it is that she says with Entity Framework, just trust me. Just do it. It's going to make your life easier. Okay, so now that I've got all of that, let's go ahead and create that little go-between. So let me do a real quick right-click, add, new class, and this is going to be my demo context. There we go. And this is going to inherit from DB context, which is inside of system data entity. And now I can go ahead and add on DB set. And let's say trail, and this is going to be our trails. There we go. And I need to make 2 little fixes here. So we're really coding on this show. Get and set. Public. I need to make my chicken cacciatore again. It's now just on my brain. Locations and get and set. Beautiful. Cool. So now I've got my context built. Now my context is going to be the go-between. That's what's going to allow me to communicate with the database, make changes to it, and get all of that back. So let's fire up my little program here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little method here called create data. And I'm going to create another one here called retrieve data. Beautiful. So on my retrieve data, or on my create data, we'll start here. Let me go ahead and say demo context equals new There we go. And let's go ahead and say context and add, context trails, and then eventually add. And we'll go ahead and add in a new trail here. And I'll create that in just a second. And then let's also say context locations add, and then let's add in our location. Now, one little thing to highlight about both of those add methods is that you'll notice they give me the object back, and that can actually make my life a little bit easier. So let me just go ahead and say location San Diego equals, and then add new location. And then let's go ahead and do a city equals, and I want San Diego, and let's do my state, and let's set that equal to CA. Beautiful. Okay. So there's my new little location. And then over here on my trail, let's go ahead and say new trail. And let's go ahead and set my name to be Mission Bay, which is my absolute favorite running trail in the world, I think. Actually, in the world is probably a bold statement, but at the very least, in San Diego. Okay, and so there is that. And then finally, context and save changes. Cool. And so now what will happen is it will go ahead and create San Diego for me and create that trail for me. And then you'll also notice right up here that I could go in and query that as well. So I could say demo context equals new. I could go ahead and say var results equals from t in context trails, where t name starts with, and let's say san, select t, and then for each trail in result, and then let's just do a real quick simple console write line, and let's do, actually, you know what, I'm just going to do it this way. Result for each. Oh, because you're not a list, not a problem. Result to list for each, and t console write line and t name. Okay. Now, this does beg a couple of very big questions before I run this about what's the database going to look like and how are we actually going to be querying the database. Now, as far as how the database is going to look, that actually depends on how we tell it to look. So what I could do, for example, on city, is I could mark this as required. And give me a data annotations reference. There we go. So that's going to make that as required. And I could also go in and say string length and maybe give this a maximum length of 50. And then I could also come down here to my little state and let's do the exact same thing. But let's go ahead and set the string length to be 2 and then the min length to be 2 as well. And I could do the exact same thing to my trail. Now, the big thing that I want you to notice here is that what I'm doing is I'm now describing my data. And I'm describing it actually not only to the entity framework, but other environments like MVC can read this information as well. WPF can read this information and automatically do validation for me based on the different attributes that I put inside of here. So I'm not just controlling my database, but I'm controlling other environments. The other big question is, well, what does the SQL look like? It's a good question. Print SQL. String SQL. Console. Write line. SQL. Let's actually see it. And one of the new improvements in Entity Framework 6 is the ability for me to say log, it's such a wonderful toy, and point to my little print SQL method that I created. And so now, in this little case here, it's going to print all of that out to the screen for me. So we can actually see what the SQL is going to look like. Cool, cool, cool?
Yeah.
All right.
Triple cool.
Triple cool. I like triple cool. So now, I have a typo. Right. One too many close parens. Take two. Okay. So now, if we give this just a moment, let's go ahead and scroll all the way up to the top here. And what this did is this connected to my own local DB. And you'll notice that it actually created the database on the fly for me. It noticed that it didn't exist, so it automatically created it. And by the way, there are different things that you can do as far as controlling how modifications are going to work and so forth. So it created that up top. And then, if I scroll on down, you'll also notice that it started to put in all the code to create my index for my trail or for my location ID, and even went in and added in my little foreign key reference. And then finally, last but not least, is it added in one little migration history that's used for its purposes to track whenever it is that I might be doing changes to the database. So that part's behind the scenes. The big part that I want you guys to notice is that it generated the appropriate script to go in and create the database automatically for me. So I didn't do any of that. It created it. You're also going to notice, if I scroll around inside of here, that right here, you're going to notice nvarchar 50 and 2, and you're going to notice nvarchar 50, and it picked that up from the restrictions. Now, you are going to notice that it's not perfect, and this is where maybe going in and tweaking the database a little bit on your own comes into play. That for our state, since it's only going to be 2 letters, that really should be ncar2 instead of nvarchar. In fact, I'd really make the argument that it should be car2 instead. So it's not perfect, but it does a really, really good job without me having to help guide it in any real way outside of those couple little attributes. It then has this huge block of code. If you stare at this long enough, this will actually turn into a 3D image. Or maybe not.
Working on it.
Okay.
Working on it.
Excellent.
It's 2D so far.
Okay. But inside of here, this is just the little entry for the entry to the database, or for the creation of the database. Now, here's the bigger part, and this is the part that people are always interested in, is what's it going to be doing behind the scenes? You'll notice that it's just generating our SQL for us. So right there is my little insert. Down below is my little query, and you're going to notice that on my insert here, let me actually re-highlight this. On my little insert, there is my my trail. There is my location. So it automatically does that for me. And then finally, if I scroll on down, this is the other item that I was looking for. There is the last little query, and you'll notice that it does in fact generate my little like statement. And so it did all of that automatically for me. Nothing else that I had to do. Now, if I go in and take a look at my database, by the way, I'm sure a couple of people noticed I did have one little typo there, but I'm not going to worry too much about it for right now.
And we're not going to worry about it either.
Good. WAC v11.0. Let me go in and connect to that little demo database that I just created. And you'll notice that sure enough, it did in fact create my little database for me. And I would mention that it's actually very easy if you are creating an MVC app to eventually even deploy this out to SQL Azure, which brings us perfectly into the cloud and into Azure. How about that for a segue?
I think that's a perfect segue, and I'll just take it.
All right.
Oh, so the next data storage mechanism that we're going to talk about is Azure Mobile Services, and specifically just the data portion of Azure Mobile Services. So in order to show this, the first thing I'm going to do is walk you through the creation of a mobile service in the portal. Okay, so let's go ahead and create for ourselves. I'm going to jump to my portal here. There we are. And I'm going to need to log in as myself. If you don't have an Azure subscription yet, you should get one. It's awesome. You can, if you're a student or a startup, you can use either DreamSpark or BizSpark to get a startup, if you need any help with that, feel free to send me an email, jeremy.foster@microsoft.com, and I'll be glad to help you get hooked up with that. You get yourself an Azure subscription, and then there's all kinds of things that you can be opened up to do. And it's really nice because when you first enable it, it comes with a $0 spending limit, meaning that you're not going to have any money charged to you unless you actually authorize it, unless you actually want to. So there, it's actually showing my credit balance. But let's jump into mobile services and create a new mobile service. So we're just going to call this Charlie, for lack of a better word. In this case, I'm going to create a new SQL database. I'm going to choose the region as the region that I'm in now, which is the west side of the United States. And for the back end, we'll choose the default JavaScript. And it says that Charlie is taken. That's awful. I'll just put my little code Foster prefix on there. And surely CF Charlie is not taken. CF Charlie, let's rename our database. Just call it CF Charlie, just so it's the exact same name. I'm going to choose a new SQL database. Actually, this is happening in a different subscription, but that's completely fine with me. So let's call this login name. I need to not do this because this will get us in trouble. Let me choose my other subscription here. Otherwise, we're going to be running into trouble. All right. So I need to sign out entirely. Hold on. Give me just 1 second. This will be really nice once we get to it.
Yeah, hey, like I said before, we're really cooking on this show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cause a distraction here while we get that squared away.
Take the attention.
Okay. So what Jeremy's going to be showing off here is really how simple it is for you to go in and create a cloud-based storage environment for your code, and something that's actually going to create a front end that could be queried via REST, and we'll actually be even taking a look at REST a bit later on. And I'm trying hard not to steal your thunder over
Position
here.
it with classic databases and why we would choose to do Azure Mobile Services for our data as opposed to using a classic database.
There we go. So with a classic database, the biggest catch that I'm going to have is that the only way that I'm going to be able to connect up to it is by doing something that can query a database, which is perfect if I'm writing something that's going to be locally hosted, if I'm writing something that's going to be on the same network as the database. But what happens if I need to go remote, or what happens if I'm using something that's, say, browser-based, JavaScript-based, where I don't have a database client installed? This is where our Azure Mobile Services are one of the big places that Azure Mobile Services can come into play, because what I can do is go in and query this just by going in and utilizing JavaScript, utilizing REST API, utilizing actually an Azure Mobile Services API as well that I could use to query the data. So it's not just data from a locally installed app, but it could also be something that's going to be browser-based.
Yeah, and it tends to make everything a whole lot easier, too. And it makes it extremely cross-platform. It's really easy to hit it from whatever platform you want. Mm-hmm. Seriously, like all the platforms, I think, have full SDKs. And the API for the data that you have in your Azure Mobile Service is just a REST-based JSON message, so you could hit it from absolutely anything.
Yep.
Maybe from my watch. We'll see. I don't think we'll be able to do that in the scope of this course. But okay, so we're back to where we want to be now. Thank you very much. We have a new mobile service called CF Charlie. I just shows the same options that I did when we were walking through it. So it should be exactly the same. Now, the thing that you'll notice here is that it's thinking about this service, right? It's creating it. Now, this isn't going to take very long, but in the interest of kind of being a cooking show, let's go ahead and open Monster Ball, which I made yesterday for this express purpose. And you can see the little bars down the bottom of my screen. So you can see when those stop moving, that means that it's created my CF Charlie. It won't take very long at all. But the only thing, the mobile service, the cool thing about it is it doesn't just give you data, it gives you a ton of features. It gives you data, it gives you a full API that you can implement in there. It gives you a scheduler so that your API operations can happen on some sort of a timed schedule. You have push notifications that'll push to all the major platforms. Identity, so it makes it one line of code to log into Facebook or log into Google or Twitter or your Microsoft account. And then you get some other features as well. But right now, we're just going to look at the data. So I'm going to go to the data, and you're going to see that it says I have no tables. So I'm going to add a table, and we'll just call this table 1. Now let's call this something a little bit more meaningful. Let's call this the widgets table. And I'll skip over the concept of the permissions for now and just choose that. And now I have the widgets table. Now, the interesting thing about the data in Azure Mobile Services, it's actually using SQL Server behind the scenes, but it handles things for you really, really well, really easily. And you don't ever even have to define the schema for a widget and tell it what's going to be stored in this table. And that's kind of crazy at first because, if you've written the database code, you know that you have a very strict schema. This table stores these things, and not only these things, but in this order and with these data types, right?
Yep.
With a mobile service, it doesn't work that way. If you go ahead and put a person in there with a first name, last name, and later on in the code of your application, you add another column to an object and push it in there, it's just going to create a column for you. So pretty interesting. Of course, that widgets table doesn't have anything inside of it right now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to Code Show. I've shown this a couple times. And I'm going to go over to the same demo that we were showing a little bit ago, the storage demo. And the very last section of the storage demo is Azure Mobile Services. So I'm going to go ahead and store something in here. We'll just say chicken. Now I put myself in an awkward position where I honestly don't know how to spell cacciatore.
That's okay. Honestly, I had to go look it up as well. But it's Cacciatore.
Okay, now I'm not so embarrassed that I didn't know how to spell
E at the
that.
end.
E at the end.
No I. Yeah, just R-E.
There we go.
There you go.
Cacciatore.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to save that. It's now saved that into my Azure Mobile Service. I'm going to close Code Show. And actually, I'll show you a little trick here. Watch this. I've got a touchscreen monitor. I've got Code Show open. If I close it, it may or may not fall entirely out. So I'm going to grab it from the top here. And everybody knows probably that you can grab an app from the top and you can move it around. You can drag it down to the bottom. Let me grab that again. I dropped it. That was truly drag and drop. And I'm going to go down to the bottom of the screen with it if it lets me. Oh, this touchscreen is not going to. I'm going to use my mouse for it. It'll do the same thing. Yeah, the
touchscreen does sort of. It seems to be a couple of dead spots.
Yeah, it loses it at the bottom. I'm going to drag it down to the bottom and now wait for it. Flip. Have you ever seen that?
No.
That flip means okay. I'm going to kill this process. It's gone. So if you ever need to make sure that app is no longer in any status, it's in a status of undefined. Go ahead and drag it to the bottom and wait.
Excellent.
Okay, so let's go back to the storage demo. There it is. Scroll to the end. I really need a faster way for these ones that are pretty large. And look at that. I don't have to remember how to spell it again. It says chicken cacciatore. So it saved it. Let's hit see the code and see exactly what's in there. Now for the Azure Mobile Service demo, it should be relatively short, and there it is. So let's just kind of break this code down. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're relying on this thing that I define as app.client. And you don't see what that is in this code, so I'm going to have to tell you what that is. The reason why I didn't put it here is because client actually stores my application key.
Okay.
And if I put it in there, then anybody would be able to use that application key and act like they're an authorized app on CodeShow accessing those tables. Okay?
That would not be good.
I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to hide that behind this app client and then just use it in here, okay? So that holds your key, and it holds the URL to that Azure Mobile Service. Now, let me go ahead and open Fiddler. We're going to see a little bit more from Fiddler a little bit later. And I'm going to show you that in Fiddler, I'm going to be able to... Well, let me go to my mobile service here. Let me get out of this storage demo and then go back into it. And let me go back to Fiddler. And I'm sorry. Never mind. This was inside of an app, so it's not going to show me this request. But basically what it's doing is it's going to, in this case, CodeShow. That's the name of my Azure Mobile Service. And then, is it Azure Mobile?
Yes.
Azure Mobile.net? I think that's what it is. Azure Mobile. And oh, it's moving too quick. I can turn on my filter here, and I can filter and only show traffic. I can show only the following hosts, and I'm only interested in... Sorry. Now I can clear my events here and try again. So let's go here, execute. I see that one, and now I don't see all the noise. And now I look, and I'm getting all kinds of crazy stuff back. So I haven't specified an actual table. I'm I'm actually getting something different there. But I would be able to show you how to connect to that service and actually just look at the JSON messages back and forth. Unfortunately, I don't have that part prepared, but that's okay.
That's all right. Okay,
but let's go back and look at this code behind here, Azure Mobile Services, look at the JavaScript. Okay, so what I'm doing here is in that client, then it's using the URL and the application key, so it's connecting to my Azure Mobile Service. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a table. And in that other mobile service, I have a table called app support, and I just want to read from that table. So this is all the code that it takes to read a table from Azure Mobile Services. And notice that it's asynchronous because I have a .then method. That means that read must be an asynchronous method and it returns a promise because I can .then. Very, very handy. In my .then, I give it this is what I call the happy path and the sad path. Okay, the happy path is I got a result back, it worked. So I'm going to receive as one of the variables the table. So this table now represents everything in the app support table. I can now call my classic array functions that we were talking about earlier on my table, which is just an array. I can filter that, pass in a function that says only show me the value that has a key of storage demo.
Okay.
And then go get me the value from that and put that in my UI. So super easy to read from what's in Azure Mobile Services and bring that into your app. And then let's look at the other way. So the other direction is that I want to update my table in Azure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle the click method of my button. This long string here is uniquely identifying the button in my HTML. There would obviously be shorter ways of doing that, but I'm going to handle the click event, and in that click event, I'm going to set the value of storage demo to the value of my Azure input field. First of all, that actual text input field, and then I'm going to go get the table and update it with that value. All right. So this code is available. You can go download Code Show and look at the code behind and see what this is. This is just a quick read and update. If you want all of the documentation from Azure Mobile Services, there's a huge amount of documentation for it. So you can see read and update and insert and delete and the full documentation for that. So now this has just been a little bit of a glimpse into Windows Azure Mobile Services.
A little bit of a glimpse.
But on day 3, we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yes, we are.
We're going to see more Azure Mobile Services.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
So I think we figured out somewhere to put some data.
Yeah. So data storage is covered.
Yep. Cool. I think it's time to move on from there, but I don't know about you, but I could use a break.
Yeah, let's take a break.
All right. We'll see you guys back here in 10 minutes.
Back in 10.